Thank you, Raymond. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So today we are actually going to talk about one of the benefits that the Social Security Administration administers, which is the supplemental security income. And just like the words say, supplemental security income, we refer to it as the SSI program. And it's a needs-based program, meaning that it's for people who have no or low income, no or low resources. And we are going to go through the criteria for SSI. We're also, and part of it is talk about the first criterion. For people who are below the age of 65, you have to show that you're disabled. If you're 65 or older and you apply for SSI, you do not have to show that you're disabled. So age or disability. We're going to talk a lot about disability. And then the other criteria, income, resources, qualified alien status, California resident. You have to be a California resident to apply for SSI in California. And then I'm going to briefly deviate to another Social Security benefit called the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. It's a very, very different program from the SSI program. And by the way, the Social Security Administration administers not only SSI, SSDI, disabled adult child benefits, widows benefits, divorce benefits, retirement benefits. There's a lot going on in that agency, lots of different programs. We're going to talk about, I really want to focus on your responsibilities when you're receiving SSI, and it's really a reporting responsibility, things that you need to report. Because if you don't report these things, you might end up with suspension of a SSI and or an overpayment, and you really don't want to do that. We're going to briefly talk about applying. We're going to talk about the different appeals levels, about representation. If you want someone to represent you at an administrative law judge hearing, how does that work? And then there's a handout about helpful suggestions. And the only one I really want to talk about is contacting your U.S. Congressperson. I've also included resources. If you want to go to the Social Security website, this is where you would go, applying for SSI. There's a handbook on Social Security benefits, which includes a section on SSI, the different living arrangements. You're in a factor in determining how much you're going to get in SSI is what living arrangement they put you in. There are also publications called SSI Spotlights, and they spotlight a certain topic about SSI. So maybe it's burial expenses, or maybe it's, I don't know, people who are self-employed. Whatever it is, there are spotlights, and you can go to those there. The Program Operations Manual System, it's the manual that their Social Security representatives use in carrying out their work. Very valuable, because if you have a question about SSI income, you go to the POMS, you go to the SSI section, and then you look at the section on income. You open that up, and then you're going to find 1,000,001 things to know about income. I'm exaggerating a little, but the continuing disability reviews. So even if you are found to be disabled initially, Social Security will continue to review whether you are disabled or not. And this publication talks about why and when. Some people have continuing disability reviews more often than others. I mean, if you're someone who is a person with quadriplegia, your continuing disability review may be every 7 years. And so if you're looking for someone to help represent you, there's an organization called the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives. The acronym is NOSCAR. You can reach out to them and say, hey, I live in this city, and can you give me some referrals of people who help people establish Social Security benefits? We also have a referral list of attorneys who do this kind of work. We're going to share it with you, but they're not the only ones. There are a lot of attorneys and advocates who do this kind of work. We do not because there are so many people who do. And so we try to focus our resources on issues where maybe people don't have, access to a lot of help. When you're on SSI, you can work, but your earnings will decrease the amount of SSI that you get. And at some point, your earnings may be too much for you to get SSI, but that's a wonderful thing, right? Because it means you're getting more than what you could get in SSI. And not only that, if you're working, you're paying FICA taxes, you're building towards your Social Security retirement or towards your Medicare. And should you become disabled, before your retirement age, maybe you could get SSDI too, because there are people who are receiving both SSI and SSDI. So there's this, it's called the Red Book because if you were to have a paper version of it, it had a red cover. It's even read on the internet, so called the Red Book. And it talks about the work incentives for people on SSI, SSDI. If you are thinking about going back to work and you're on SSI, or you're working on SSI and you haven't had any counseling, I highly recommend that you reach out to what are called WIPAs, their Work Incentives Planning and Assistance Program. There's a WIPA in every county. They've been certified by Social Security to give benefits counseling for people who are on Social Security benefits, want to go back to work. What's going to happen to all my public benefits should I go back to work, if anything? And so this link will take you to information on WIPAs and where you could find your WIPA. And then finally, find your U.S. Congressperson. I've included this because if you're having any problems with Social Security, you can contact your U.S. Congressperson. And at the end of the training, I'll show you how to use this website and initiate what is called a congressional inquiry. Your U.S. Congressperson is going to ask you to fill out some information, a consent to release, so that Social Security can release information to your U.S. Congressperson. I've had a great success using them or having my clients use them. And I'll give you an example of one of the clients who used his U.S. Congressperson to get an issue resolved. Okay, now we're going to start talking about the criteria for the SSI program. And the first one is if you're under the age of 65, you have to meet the criteria to be considered disabled under the program rules. I may have a disability, but that disability may not be meet the criteria necessary for me to be able to get any SSI. Because I may not meet the definition of disability. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we move along. In fact, there are a lot of people with disabilities who are working. So what I want to say with that is just because you have a disability doesn't mean that you cannot work. And by the way, your employers, if you have a disability, can provide you with reasonable accommodations so that you can do your work. So let's say that I download the application for SSI, I fill it out, I attach medical documents that I think will be important for Social Security to know. I walk it in, submit it to my local office, and I have a copy of those documents because I'm going to want them to date stamp the copies in case they say they never got my application. I'll have proof that I did go in and make the application. So the Social Security Administration will determine whether I meet the criteria of countable income, countable resources, qualified alien status, and whether I'm a California resident. At some point, they're going to send my file to a state agency called Disability Determination Services. When my file gets there, it's going to be assigned to an analyst, and that analyst will decide whether I'm disabled or not. So it's not the Social Security Administration that determines disability. It's DDS, not to be confused with the Department of Developmental Services. In any event, that analyst, and so at some point after, I would say after a couple of weeks, perhaps after submitting my application, I may contact Social Security to find out if my file is with DDS. And if it is, I'll ask, well, what office is it in? And they'll tell me, they may say it's in Sacramento. And I would call the Sacramento office and ask to speak to my analyst and say, look, I'm here to help you gather information. What do you need? And the analyst may say, well, I wrote to Dr. X, Y, and Z, and they haven't responded. And I would say, what is it that you want? Let me get that for you. I'll get them to respond, or I'll get that to you. Because what you want to do is make sure that the analyst has everything that he or she needs. So when the time comes to make that disability determination, everything is there. And hopefully it's a good outcome, right? The analyst can also have me undergo what is called a consultative exam, where one of their doctors examines me. I've heard that they're pretty cursory reviews, and these doctors don't necessarily take a lot of time to examine you. So it's really important for you to include in your application a lot of good medical documentation from your own treating providers. Now, I'm going to talk about the different definitions of disability and about two different concepts too: presumptive disability and compassionate allowances. So the definition of disability for an adult is different than the definition of disability for a child. A child is anyone below the age of 18. So for an adult to be found disabled, it means that the person is unable to engage in substantial gainful activity because of his or her disabilities, and that these disabilities are going to result in the person's death or last at least 12 continuous months. Now, what is substantial gainful activity? It's a dollar amount. So I've included in this packet that you're going to get the substantial gainful activity amounts for 2024. If you're applying based on blindness, your substantial gainful activity is $2,590 gross a month. And if you have any other disability, it's $1,550. So how does this work? So if I'm working and earning gross at least $1,550, I am engaging in substantial gainful activity. Therefore, I am not disabled. And if that's the case, there's where the analysis ends. And so that's the definition of disability for an adult. It's focused on the ability to work and earn a certain amount of money. And basically, whereas with children, the focus is on whether the disabilities cause marked and severe functional limitations, and that the disability or disabilities are going to result in the death of the child, or that the disabilities are expected to last at least 12 continuous months. If you're applying based on blindness for children and adults, you have to show that you're statutorily blind, and this is the definition of statutory blindness. Okay, now let's talk about presumptive disability. There are certain disabilities where Social Security is pretty sure that the analyst is going to find the person disabled based on the disability. So what presumptive disability does is that Social Security starts paying you your benefit while the analyst does the disability determination. And they'll pay up to 6 months of the benefit. And let's say that in month 4 of receiving the benefit, the analyst decides that you're not disabled. Do you have to pay that money back? You don't have to pay that money back. What are those disabilities? So here's a list of those disabilities. I'm not going to read all of them, but amputation of the leg at the hip, allegation of total blindness, total deafness, allegation of cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism spectrum disorder, for example, with the complete inability to independently perform self-care activities, and that the person requesting the benefit is at least 4 years old. There are other disabilities based on weight, AIDS, HIV/AIDS, end-stage renal failure, and Lou Gehrig's disease as examples of those disabilities where Social Security may apply presumptive eligibility. There are other conditions in the list of compassionate allowances where Social Security has determined that if you have the condition in the list of compassionate allowances, and when you open up that condition, you meet the criteria for that condition, you are going to be found disabled. And so the disability determination that the analyst does is very quick. This list does change from time to time. Conditions are added. They even ask you to submit a condition for consideration. And so this is the list. There may have been some things added, but I just wanted to show you what the list looks like. I mean, I've never heard of maybe 99.9% of these disabilities. So the list goes on. And so if you see that one of your disability is here, like mixed dementias, you could actually go online and open it and find out what the criteria is to meet the compassionate allowances. So those are some things that could happen along the way while disability is being determined. So when the analyst is ready to review the information in her file on me and whether I'm disabled, there's a sequential analysis that happens. So the first thing that the analyst is going to ask is Maria working at the level of substantial gainful activity? Because if I am, I will not be found disabled. Okay. And there are other rules, other deductions you can make to your income, and you can read about it here in other information. But essentially, if you're working at substantial gainful activity, you're not going to be found disabled, and that's the end of the analysis. But let's say that I'm not working at substantial gainful activity. What's the next question? Is Maria's condition severe enough? Is it going to last at least 12 continuous months or result in her death? If the answer is no, that's the end. I will not be found disabled. If the answer is yes, then the analyst goes to step number 3. And by the way, if this were a child, the analyst could ask number 1 because there are young adults below the age of 18 who are working. So that question would be asked of that young adult. Same for step number 2, applies to kids too. Step number 3 applies to adults and kids too. So the question number 3 for my case is whether Maria's impairment or impairments meets the listing of impairments. The listing of impairments is contained in what is called the Blue Book. Why Blue Book? Because if you were to get a physical copy of this, it would be blue. And it's actually blue also online. But so if my condition is, if I meet the listing of impairments for my condition, then I will be found disabled, and that's the end of the analysis. Same for a child. If the child is found to meet the listing of impairments, then that's the end of the analysis. The child is found disabled. So what is the Blue Book? You've got the links to the Blue Book, but this is the way it looks if you go online. There's adult listing of impairments, childhood listing of impairments. This is the adult listing of impairments. And let's say that I have a digestive disorder. I would click on digestive disorders and look for my disorder and then read about it and see if I meet the criteria for my disorder. And that's the way question number 3 works. Now, if a child does not meet the listing of impairments, then the analyst is going to look at certain domains to see if the disability is functionally equivalent to the listing of impairments. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But let's say that my condition does not meet the listing of impairments. Then the analyst goes to step number 4. Can I do the same work I did before? If I can do the same work I did before, even though I'm disabled, then I'm not going to be found disabled. Okay. Now, let's say that if I can't do the same work I did before, then the last question is, can Maria do any other type of work given her age, education, skills, her physical functional limitations, her mental functional limitations? And it's here a lot where the analyst will work with a vocational rehab expert, and that person is going to review my file. And it's possible that that person may come up with 10 jobs I can do in the national economy. And at that point, they're going to deny my application because they're going to say I'm not disabled. Yes, I have a disability, but my disability doesn't prevent me from working. So you see how getting to steps number 4 and 5 can be really tricky, right? Because you can have a disability, but it may not prevent you from working. And so if the vocational rehab expert in my case says Maria can do these 10 jobs, and if I appeal, because you have 2 choices, you can accept or you can appeal. If I appeal, my job is going to have to show perhaps the judge or the other person who's looking at my file that in fact I can't do those jobs. I can't do the other job. I can't do those jobs, and I'm going to have to show that I can't do those jobs. So that's the sequential analysis that is done to determine disability. Now, earlier I had mentioned that if a child doesn't meet the listing of impairments, then the analyst is going to look at other information, they're called domains, to determine whether the child's conditions are functionally equivalent to the listing of impairments. So this is a publication that was authored by Social Security, and it's for physicians and other healthcare professionals. So there's a lot of good information here. It talks about the definition of disability and what kinds of documents are acceptable medical sources. So they have a list here, those kinds of, medical experts. And then the analyst is going to review the information in the file to see if there's any information that addresses the ability of the child to acquire and use information. Like we consider how well the child learns or acquires information and uses the information he or she has learned. There's information on that. The analyst is going to look at how well the child is able to focus and maintain attention, begins, carries through, and finishes activities, including the pace at which the child performs those activities. The analyst is going to look at how well that child interacts and relates with others, They'll consider how the child initiates and sustains emotional connections with others, cooperates with others, complies with rules, etc. Talks about that. They're going to look at how well the child manipulates objects. So they're looking at gross and fine motor skills. How well does the child care for him or herself? How does he cope with stress and changes in the environment? How does he take care of his own possessions, health, living area, etc.? And then lastly, they're going to consider the cumulative physical effects of the physical and or mental impairments and their associated treatments or therapies on the child's functioning. So all of these areas are areas that the analyst is going to want information on, especially if the child doesn't meet the listing of impairments in the Blue Book. So with this, you should be thinking about when you submit an application for SSI for your child to include documentation that addresses these areas. Maybe the IEP from the school has it, or the IPP, or maybe there are other types of reports and records that you could submit that addresses each domain that we just covered. And you'll have this information to review. I want to review 2 forms with you. These forms are not given to you with your application. These forms are typically used by the analyst when the analyst wants information, and can be used in the consultative exam, their own doctor examining the applicant. And these forms really talk about what your physical and mental residual capacity is. And it's all about work. You know, what can you do based on your physical limitations? So this is the physical residual capacity assessment. It talks about, well, for example, can I occasionally lift or carry less than 10 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds? Frequently lift or carry. You see, these are all things that you would be doing for work, right? Perhaps stand or walk less than 2 hours in an 8-hour workday. And this would be filled out by a doctor. And if you need to even be more specific than this, so let's say, for example, that I can only walk up to an hour a day in an 8-hour period. After that, I get terrible sciatica. Well, the doctor should write down, Maria, the doctor can check off less than 2 and explain that it can't be more than an hour, because what happens to me if it's more than an hour. Sitting, pushing and pulling, postural limitations, balancing, stooping, crouching, crawling, manipulative limitations. Can I handle? Can I finger? Can I feel? Can I reach in all directions? Visual limitations, communicative limitations in my hearing and my speaking, environmental limitations. And am I someone who can work in a humid environment, in extreme cold, extreme heat, where there are odors, fumes, and dust, vibrations, noise, right? And there's additional information that the doctor can put here. I can tell you, I am 100% certain that if I gave my doctor the forms to fill out, she would not know how to fill them out. She wouldn't know the answers to these questions, because I never talked to her about this. So don't assume your doctors know how to answer these questions appropriately. So when you want your doctors to fill out the forms, you need to be there with them so that they can ask you these questions, because they may not know the answers. And one of 2 things can happen. They either won't fill out the form, or they'll fill it out incorrectly. The other form is the mental residual functional capacity form. It addresses understanding and memory, the ability to remember locations and work-like procedures, the ability to understand and remember detailed instructions in the area of sustained concentration and persistence, the ability to maintain attention and concentration for extended periods of time, the ability to make simple work-related decisions. Social interaction. Is Maria someone who can interact appropriately with the general public? Does she have the ability to ask simple questions or request assistance? What about in the area of adaptation? Do I have the ability to respond appropriately to changes in the work-life setting? Do I have the ability to set realistic goals or make plans independently of others? And the doctor can put a lot more information here. So those are the two forms that if I were applying for SSI, I would have my doctor fill out and sign. If you want to know more about these functional capacity forms, you remember the POMs, the program operation manuals, the instructions for employees. You could go to the POMs and look up DI for disability, look up this section, and this is what it looks like. And you click on residual functional capacity assessment introduction, and you get to learn all about this area. Vocational expert handbook, should you be in a situation where you might need to go to a hearing and there's a vocational expert who said you can do these 10 other jobs, you've got to learn about what they do, how do they prepare for a hearing, what happens during the hearing, how do they protect your private information. This is the sequential analysis that I went through, and more information. So you can look at that. So now we've covered, in the last 30 minutes or so, we've covered only one criterion for SSI. If you're below the age of 65, you have to show that you're disabled. 65 and older, you don't have to show disability, just that you're aged. The second criterion is income. You can't have too much in income. In fact, you don't have to have any income. The problem is when you have too much incountable income, because the SSI program will never look at gross income. They will always allow you to make certain deductions to get what is called countable income. It's the income that will be counted to see if you qualify for any SSI. Income, you can have earned income, you can have unearned income. Unearned income could be maybe you're receiving another Social Security benefit, or you get cash from friends, or unemployment benefits, any type of unearned income. In-kind income, it's also called in-kind support and maintenance. If you're an adult and you're living with other people, and it does not matter that you're living with family, the SSI program is expecting the SSI recipient to meet his or her fair share of food and shelter expenses. And if the person is not, then their SSI is going to get dinged. So I may be living with 2 other people, and I'm not meeting my fair share of food or shelter expenses because I don't get enough SSI to do that. Then the program is going to say to me, Maria, the people that you live with, excuse me, the people that you live with, they are helping you pay for food and shelter expenses. That's a form of income, and we call it in-kind income. And they apply one of 2 formulas, and rather than getting the full amount of SSI, I'm going to get a reduced amount of SSI because I'm receiving this form of income. There's a really good publication authored by Justice and Aging on this subject. I highly recommend that you read it so that you can understand these concepts. It could be pretty complicated because people's facts can be complicated, but that's the generalist gist of in-kind income. There's another form of income that's called deemed income. So if a minor is applying for SSI, the income and resources of the parent with whom the child lives will be counted as if it were the child's income. Let us not forget that there are children who have their own income. So for example, if a child is receiving child support, that's income to the child. So aside from the income from the parent, the child may have his or her own income. And by the way, child support is only counted, 2/3 of child support is counted as income for the SSI program for a child. The other deeming happens, let's say I'm married and I apply for SSI, my husband's income will be deemed to me. And that could, deeming can disqualify the person from getting SSI or reduce the amount of SSI that the person's going to get. The other form of deeming is when someone sponsors you to become a lawful permanent resident. And so the person who's applying for SSI, the person sponsored, could be deemed, the income and resources of the sponsor and the sponsor's spouse can be deemed to the applicant and make the applicant not eligible for SSI or get a reduced amount. So these are the different kinds of income, but not everything counts as income. So you have to, for gross income, there is always going to be a deduction. So if you have any unearned income, you add up all the unearned income, you get to deduct $20, and that becomes, the result becomes your countable income. If you have earnings from work, you get to deduct, you get your gross income, you deduct $65, you divide by 2 to get to countable income. There are other deductions that you can do to gross income, in parent-related work expenses, blind work expenses, and you can even use the $20 that you would use for unearned income. If you have no unearned income, you can take that out of your gross earned incomes. And there are just some things that are not considered income, like, the CalFresh that you get, income tax refunds, grants, scholarships, fellowships, and gifts, only for a period of time. Some of these rules are, it's not just yes and no. There are rules that need to be followed, time frames within which to do things, loans to you that you have to repay. This is just a very short list of things, examples of what is not considered income. And then the rest of this publication shows you how to get to countable income, the deductions that you can make to earned and unearned income. So let me explain how that works. Here's some more information for you. Every year, this publication comes out. This one's for 2024, and it shows you what the different benefits amounts are. And you'll notice right away that not everyone gets the same amount. It depends on what living situation they put you in. Are you in independent status or living in the household of someone else? Are you living in a non-medical out-of-home care, board and care? Are you in independent living status with no cooking facilities? Are you a minor living with a parent? Are you a minor living in what's considered the household of another? And so you'll see, and also the other thing that matters is your disability. Are you a person who's getting SSI based on blindness or on any other type of disability? Independent living status doesn't mean that you're living alone. You could be living with other people, but you have rental liability. Your name is on the rental agreement. That would put you in independent living status. And let's say that that's the status I would be put under. And that, so the most I would get every month would be $1,182.94. And let's say that I have income from work and income from not working. Let's say that I get interest from my little bank account or whatever it is. And when after I do the deductions to gross income, my countable income for both earned and unearned is $1,200. Will I get any SSI? Well, $1,200 is more than the $1,182.94 that I would get. No, I will not get any SSI because my countable income is more than what I would get under the program. Will not get any. But let's say that my countable income is $1,000. Will I get any? Yes, so what the program's going to do is going to take the amount I would have gotten, $1,182.94, deduct my countable income of $1,000, and I will get $82.94 in SSI for that month. And as long as I get $1 of SSI, I get the Medi-Cal that's categorically linked to the SSI. So that's how countable income works and how it will affect whether you countable income will either reduce your SSI or make you ineligible for SSI because you're over income. Let's talk about resources. This is the third criterion for the program. You don't have to have anything. But if you have things, personal and real property, they're considered resources. So generally speaking, resources are things you see here, right? Vehicles, personal property, blah, blah, blah. Deemed resources. So the same concept of deeming income is applied to resources. So for example, a minor who's applying, they're going to look at the parents' income, parents with whom the child lives, income and resources. Those are deemed resources. There are things that don't count as resources for the program. So if you own a home and you live in it, it's not going to be counted as a resource. One vehicle, regardless of the value, will not be counted as resource. Household goods and personal effects. So for example, your refrigerator, your furniture, etc., will not be counted as a resource. And this is just a short example. This is not an exhaustive list of what is not a resource. The SSI program is a very complex program, and a lot of times there's no easy yes or no answer. A lot of times is, well, it depends. So if you have an ABLE account here in California, it's called CalABLE, and we're going to put the link to that program. If you're an SSI recipient, you can have up to $100,000 in that account, and it will not affect your eligibility for SSI because normally under the SSI program, if you're an adult, you can't have more than $2,000 in countable resources. If you're a couple applying for SSI, you can't have more than $3,000 in resources. But if you're able to open here in California a CalABLE account and you're on SSI, you can have up to $100,000 in that account. Anyone can put money into your account. There's a limit every year as to how much money you can put into the account. But, and the money that people put into that account is not counted as income to the SSI recipient, whereas under the general rules, any money that someone gives me would be counted as income to me. I want to go back to income because I need you to understand something very important. That anything that I get money-wise, income, this month in April is considered income for the month of April. Anything that's left over the following month turns into a resource. That's the general rule. There are instances where the program will allow you more time to spend the money before it becomes a resource. So if you get a retroactive SSI payment, you have up to 9 months to spend that income before it becomes a resource that can affect your eligibility. We have a publication on SSI and they're called lump sum payments. We're going to put the link in chat so that you can look at it at your leisure. Really important because I've seen cases where they don't know this. They don't know that income becomes a resource the following month, and they're saving money in their bank account for something. And then they get a letter from SSI saying, you've been over-resourced for the last 2 years. And so all that money that we gave, and you were not eligible for SSI because you were over-resourced for those last 2 years. And by the way, you need to give us that money back. So really important to know the concept of income turning into resources, which is the general rule. And then there are these exceptions for these lump sum payments. The fourth criterion for eligibility for SSI is that you have to have the right qualified alien status. Of course, we're not talking about US citizens because a US citizen can apply for SSI. We're talking about qualified aliens. There are 7 categories of qualified aliens, and they're here. I'm not an expert in immigration, but I do want to talk about lawful permanent resident. When you become a lawful permanent resident, federal law bars the person from applying for SSI for at least 5 years. But in California, we have a state program called Cash Assistance Program for Immigrants that this person could apply for and hopefully get while they're waiting for the 5 years to come around. And there are other statuses, and I want to show you here. There are certain special statuses, like if you're a victim of severe form of human trafficking, if you're an Iraqi or Afghani special immigrant, if you are a Ukrainian humanitarian parolee, special rules for them. Anyway, you can look at this at your leisure. I'm going to stop talking about SSI for a moment because I want to talk about this other Social Security benefit called Social Security Disability Insurance. So I'm working and I'm paying FICA taxes, FICA taxes. Those taxes go towards my Social Security retirement, my Medicare, and should I become disabled before my retirement age and I meet other criteria, I can begin to receive SSDI. I have Social Security Disability Insurance. I have to be disabled. The same analysis for SSI. And I have to meet 2 additional tests. The first one, aside from showing that I'm disabled, I have to meet the have I worked recently test. So let's say that I am 60 years old. So I would be looking here at age 31 or older. I have to show when I apply that in the last 10 years, I worked at least 5 of those. And you can see that the younger you become disabled, the less amount of time you have to do, right? So for example, if you became disabled at age 24, you would have to show that you, in the last 3 years of work, the last 3 years before you applied, you worked at least half of that time. So there are people who perhaps, because we would get these calls, they would say, well, I can't understand. I worked and I paid into the system, and why am I not getting my SSDI? It's possible that they didn't meet this test. It's possible that the last time they worked was 15 years ago, right? And they need to, and they're 31 years or older, and they need to show that in the last 10 years prior to application, they worked at least 5 of those. And then the other test is, how long have you worked? So how long have you worked in your lifetime? How long? If you're 60 years old, you have to show that you have worked 9.5 years. And so that's the criteria for SSDI. When you're on SSDI for 2 years, you become eligible for Medicare, which is another public health care benefit. Let's not confuse it with Medi-Cal, which is different. So there are people who are receiving SSI and SSDI, and they have both Medi-Cal and Medicare. They're called dual eligibles or Medi-Medis. So that does, people who are receiving both benefits, they do exist. And you can get Medicare right away upon being eligible for SSDI if you have end-stage renal failure or Lou Gehrig's disease. Those are the 2 exceptions to the general rule where you have to wait 2 years to get Medicare. I'm now switching back to SSI because I really want to talk about these reporting responsibilities. This is a publication from Social Security. It talks about your rights. Great, you can read about it. But I'm more interested in what your responsibilities are because people get into trouble when they don't report things that they should have. because the SSI program is a needs-based program, income matters, resources matter. If you're an adult living with other people, that matters. If you get married, now you have deeming, so that matters. If you divorce, that matters. So there are a lot of things you need to report, and you need to report these changes by the 10th day of the next month. And when you get your eligibility, the letter from Social Security saying that you're eligible for SSI, you should be getting information about your reporting responsibilities. So this is just a list of the things that you should be telling them. If someone leaves your home and they're no longer living there, when someone comes to live with you, whether you change your name, whether you start working, whether your income changes, whether you stop working, etc. Your sponsor's income changes. If you leave the United States or return to the US, you can't leave the US for more than 30 consecutive days, because if you do, your SSI is suspended. You won't be eligible for SSI. So that's the general rule. For SSI, you can download the application, fill it out, take it to your local office. You can apply online. You can ask for a reasonable accommodation and get someone at Social Security if you have a disability that would allow you, like if you're deaf or hard of hearing, you can ask for help with that. You can make an appointment and have someone help you from your office, through your local office, to help you with the application. And you'll see that appeals. Okay, this is another publication from Social Security about the appeals process. There are 4 stages of appeal. The first stage after you apply is a reconsideration. And what happens there is, if you were denied SSI because of income, resources, immigration status, and you file a certain form for reconsideration, what's going to happen is that someone else from Social Security is going to look at that decision from the first agent to see if that decision was correct or not. If you were denied SSI because you are found not to be disabled, you would be filling out a different reconsideration form. And then what will happen is another analyst from DDS will review the file to see if the first analyst was correct in his or her decision. If you lose at the reconsideration level, then you go to, your next level is a hearing before an administrative law judge. If you lose there, you can ask for an appeals council review. And if you lose there, you can ask for you can go to federal court. Believe me, you really don't want to go past, really, not even to reconsideration, but not past the reconsideration phase. So it's really important when you're submitting your application to submit as much current documentation as possible. And so this publication goes through the different stages of appeal. So the reconsideration, what forms you have to file, depending on whether it's because of disability or not, and how much time you have. You have 60 days to appeal. The hearing, it tells you what forms to appeal, how many days you have to appeal. And the notices will tell you this too. And then the appeals council and the federal court. And those are the different stages of appeal. Representation. There are people out there who help others establish Social Security benefits. Some of them are attorneys and some of them are not. You don't have to be an attorney to represent someone at an administrative law judge hearing for Social Security. Now, what this document says, though, is that This person who's representing you will only be able to get fees if they win the case. And the fees are either 25% of past due benefits, usually a retroactive benefit, or 7,200, whichever is less. Now, that person may petition Social Security for more, but Social Security is going to want to know what was so difficult about this case that you're asking for more fees, right? So that being said, when you're looking for someone to represent you, you've got to sell your case. If this is what I do for a living, I represent people, and the only way I'm going to get my fees is if I win the cases. I'm going to look for cases where I think I'm going to win. So if you go to someone to review your case, typically they don't charge to do this. You want to take as much documentation as possible. They're going to review the information. And if they say, no, not interested, that probably means that they don't think it's a strong case. You could go to someone else and try to see if you get another opinion. But if 2 or 3 people are telling you, no, they don't want to take the case, it's because they probably think it's not a strong case, and they should be telling you what's not strong about your case. So more information on representation there. Now, I want to go ahead and go to the site for finding your U.S. Congressperson. And remember, I had that at the beginning of the training under resources. We had the link to find your U.S. Congressperson. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing and go to that. So that's the link. This is what you're going to find. So someone give me a zip code. Anyone?
95811.
95811. Okay, so your representative, U.S. Congressperson, is Doris Matsui. And so you would go to her website and you would go to services and you would go help with a federal agency, because the Social Security Administration is a federal agency, and they're going to, she's going to have you fill out a release form so that they can get information from Social Security. And she's telling you what information she wants from you. And this will initiate a congressional inquiry. And so these are all the different federal agencies that they work with. So why not? So the case that I had involved a gentleman whose son was being assessed in-kind support and maintenance because his son's SSI was not enough to pay the fair share of food and shelter, because the father lived in LA County in an area where house prices had gone up a lot, and he paid a lot in property taxes, and property taxes is counted as a shelter expense, and there's no way that his son could meet fair share. And so what the dad did is opened up a CalAble account for his son, so that every month his son could meet his fair share of food and shelter. So father and others, I don't know who was putting money into the CalAble account, but it was enough that between his SSI and his CalAble money, he was meeting fair share of food and shelter. And so this gentleman opened up the CalAble account and started to do this. And he went to the Social Security office to make sure that he was doing things right, that he could do this. And he got all kinds of answers. I don't know, yes, no. And then he reached out to us. In the meantime, his son got a letter from Social Security saying, you're receiving in-kind support and maintenance. We're going to ding your social SSI benefit. And they did. They reduced his SSI amount every month. And so when he came to us, I said to him, we're gonna go to a hearing. So go ahead and appeal. But in the meantime, I want you to contact your US Congressperson because I want you to have them set up a call between you, Father, me, and someone at Social Security who is well versed in able accounts and SSI. And they did, in fact, set up that call for us. We had that call, explained the situation, and the gentleman from Social Security said, yes, Father, you did it all right. We were wrong. We're going to reimburse your son the money we took out all those months. So he was going to receive a retroactive award or retroactive money and they were going to give him his full benefit amount. So that was a really good experience. Just to get a call with someone at Social Security who knows what they're doing, right? And as a result of that call, we didn't have to go to a hearing. The issue was resolved. So that was an example of a good experience using the congressional representative. So the other helpful hints are you can read them. I'm not going to go ahead and read them, but I'd rather use the time to answer any questions. So we have come to the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions. And I think we can stop recording so that people can feel comfortable.